military, but the alcohol got the better of him. What I envisioned was him being in some sort of medical facility. I just thought, what a great candidate for them to learn about the results of alcoholism and what it does to a body. But his body was sold to the military, specifically used as a crash test dummy in a simulated Humvee explosion. I was devastated. I had the box. I don't know if they were his ashes or not. I just held it as tight as I could, and I just told him how sorry I was.
Body Brokers, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme.
The threat of severe storms and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last
a 7th straight day of terrifying weather.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
The Israel-Hamas war. Stay with CBS News for continuing coverage.
True crime and justice. Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
You can't get answers in a tweet on Face the Nation. We try to separate the noise from the news. You need to be able to have an actual conversation.
Tonight, a pregnant woman's medical ordeal after getting caught up in Idaho's restrictive abortion laws. Then, new footage shows the race to save people during the deadly Maui fires. And a cold blast sweeps parts of the U.S. How low will it go? On the CBS Evening News.
I think I asked direct questions. I don't know that they're tough questions per se. Why aren't you holding yourself to that standard? It doesn't look like Congress is doing anything. What has to happen? That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. And that means a civil conversation with perspective.
Israel matters not to just Ukraine and Israel. It matters to us. It affects our national security.
Israel's facing an existential threat, and we can have a debate about Ukraine and the border and Taiwan, and those are all important topics too. We should discuss those, but I don't want to slow down Israel.
You can't be pro-life and not care about the life of the mother and the health of the mother.
Hello, I'm Nicole Killian in Washington, and welcome to America Decides. Israel has confirmed that it carried out an airstrike on a Gaza refugee camp. The IDF says the strikes killed a Hamas military commander and neutralized at least 50 other terrorists. Palestinian officials say that at least 50 people were killed and over 150 were wounded at the camp, which is located in northern Gaza. CBS News has not independently confirmed those figures. CBS News' Tina Kraus joins us now from Tel Aviv, Israel. Tina, thanks so much for being with us. Tell us about this refugee camp and this area of Gaza that was hit.
Nicole, this area is the largest refugee camp in Gaza. This is where people had chosen to stay. They had been warned to get out of the area, but only about 800,000 Palestinians have reportedly fled south. So some of them are staying within. A lot of the women and children have fled south, but a lot of the men are still there. However, the pictures we are seeing in the rubble from this airstrike show women and children being pulled out, people pulling out bodies with their bare hands. One man saying, "We are literally filling bags with children. What are we doing?" So the pain, the anger, the heartbreak from the Palestinian side is palpable tonight. It is horrible over there, and they are trying to understand why this has to happen. Israel saying it has to happen because Hamas must be destroyed, whatever it takes.
Yeah, very difficult images to watch. And to that point, Tina, what are the feelings on the ground in Israel as we're seeing increased barrages of rocket fire from Gaza?
We felt a lot of that today. There is certainly a great deal of anxiety here while people have been out on the streets holding signs with the pictures of the hostages and vowing to bring them home. They are being pulled into shelters when the air raid sirens sound. And we didn't hear a lot of air raid sirens, but we did hear a lot of rocket fire today, the interceptions by the Iron Dome missile defense system up in the air. Big explosions here in Tel Aviv. In fact, I was in my room for one of them, and the glass on my desk completely started shaking. So that's the biggest we have heard here in Tel Aviv. Just to tell you that Hamas is firing more and more rockets into Israel and deep into Israel, because the ones we heard being intercepted with those loud explosions were headed further north.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that he will not agree to a ceasefire with Hamas. Do we know how much longer Israel's military operations will continue?
Well, we know that Netanyahu has said it'll take however long it needs to take. But to answer your question, I know there have been fierce battles today, and the IDF has admitted that and said that they lost 2 Israeli soldiers overnight in fighting. Hamas saying they were locked in fierce firefights. Israel saying it was definitely deeper into Gaza, but not revealing actually the nature of the battle. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said when that Israeli soldier was released overnight a day ago that this is proof the ground operation is working. And he believes, while there's no certainty Hamas could release more hostages, he believes there's a better chance if the IDF keeps up the pressure on the militants.
And what more can you tell us about the humanitarian situation? Has more aid been able to get in?
A little bit. The White House said today that 66 trucks got into Gaza over the last 24 hours. So there is some moving in, but again, a trickle. The UN very frustrated, saying it's nowhere near what's needed. They're negotiating with Israel, the U.S. is, to try to also get fuel into Gaza because the hospitals and Palestinians are needing this fuel. They're desperate for it. But Israel, it's a sticking point. They don't want this fuel going in. They're afraid it'll turn up in the hands of Hamas, and it could be used in their rockets. So the UN Secretary General just saying that civilians are bearing the brunt of this conflict, and he said he's dismayed at reports that up to 2/3 of the Palestinian victims have been women and children. Nicole?
Tina Kraus, we thank you so much for your reporting tonight. Stay safe. We're joined now by CBS News Chief White House Correspondent Nancy Cordes. And Nancy, has there been any response yet from the White House to this latest Israeli strike?
There has not, Nicole, and that's not unusual. Since the beginning of this conflict, the White House has been careful not to weigh in on particular strikes, particular strategies as they are unfolding, because there can often be so much confusion on the ground about exactly what has taken place, who was the aggressor, and they don't want to appear to be criticizing an ally in real time. So the spokesman for the National Security Council, John Kirby, was asked about this strike at the White House briefing today, and he declined to comment, saying that it's all too new and they're not ready to weigh in yet.
That being said, Nancy, I mean, what is the administration's position with respect to a ceasefire? As we know, many have been calling for one, but it seems that isn't happening anytime soon.
Right. The White House has made it very clear, Nicole, that they do not support the notion of a ceasefire. They say that that would only enable Hamas to buy time to reconstitute itself, to resupply itself, to get stronger, essentially. So they do not support the notion of a ceasefire. They have been open to the notion of a humanitarian pause, basically a temporary lull in aggression so that more humanitarian aid can get into Gaza. That's been very slow going. And it appears that over the past couple of weeks, they've been more or less satisfied with the pace of Israel's strikes, even though there's nowhere near as much humanitarian aid getting in on a daily basis. 66 trucks today, we're told, as the White House would like to see. But when it comes to a ceasefire, we've had no indication that the White House is going to change its mind on that.
As you know, Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin were both on the Hill today advocating for the president's foreign aid package to Israel, Ukraine, and other parts of the world. Here's part of what they said.
This funding is critical to outcompeting our strategic rivals. This request will bolster deterrence.
What happens in Ukraine and what happens in Israel matters not to just Ukraine and Israel. It matters to us. It affects our national security.
Obviously, they were making their case, but how confident is the Biden administration that Congress will keep this package intact?
Well, it's a really murky situation right now, Nicole. The White House, as you know, has asked for not just emergency aid to Israel, but it also wants $60 billion in emergency aid to Ukraine, and it wants about $9 billion in humanitarian funding for people in Gaza and elsewhere. And what the new Republican speaker has proposed instead, sort of flexing his muscle, is to say that instead what he's going to propose is only funding for Israel, about $14 billion worth, stripping everything else out and offsetting that funding with cuts to the IRS. That's unprecedented. Typically, emergency funding, as you know, having covered this, is not offset. So the White House argues that that would not only set a bad precedent, but they say this is funding that they have promised to not just Israel, but to Ukraine, and that to fail to pass all of this funding together in one fell swoop would be letting down our allies. It would be sending a message to Putin that he just needs to wait out the U.S. and that we will lose our resolve. And they made the case today in that hearing, Nicole, point blank, that if the U.S. does not provide more funding for Ukraine, it will lose this war. So they're making the case that the stakes couldn't be higher. And while there is some growing opposition among Republicans to further funding for Ukraine, I have to tell you, we heard from a lot of Senate Republicans today that they do not agree, and they want to see this funding passed, both the funding for Ukraine and the funding for Israel, as soon as possible.
And then, Nancy, before we let you go, the Senate also voted late today to confirm former Treasury Secretary Jack Lew as ambassador to Israel. Remind us why there was a vacancy at such a critical time, and how soon could he head to the region?
Well, this has been, priority number one for the White House, is getting a permanent ambassador in place. And Jack Lew has been waiting in the wings for quite a while now. They've had an interim ambassador who has been basically doing the work of a U.S. ambassador, but obviously having someone confirmed in that role only gives them more authority to negotiate on behalf of the U.S., to make decisions on behalf of the U.S., and to communicate that back to the White House. And so even though there are a long list of nominees for a variety of positions and a variety of ambassadorships around the world, the fact that Jack Lew was basically pushed to the front of the line and was confirmed today with some Republican support just gives you a sense of how big of a priority this was for the White House.
All right, Nancy Cordes from the White House tonight. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's not just Democrats versus Republicans fighting over what to do about aid for Israel. We'll get to the divide within the GOP next. Streaming, America Decides.
Well, let me start with this.
This really happened.
Have you told the government?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
You want me to just
What's
keep
wrong
going?
with that argument?
What have you learned?
Do you know why?
Why? Why?
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good?
Mm-hmm.
Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
If we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS Reports.
You had a substitute teacher that was pretty popular. What was his reputation?
Everyone loved him.
You had to miss a test. What did he offer to have you make up the test?
He said that I can come by after school was all over and just take the exam. The blinds were down. He closed the door. The next thing I knew, he was right next to me. That's when I realized what was going to happen. Even if I wanted to scream at the top of my lungs, no one would hear me because no one was there. He told me that if I ever said anything to anyone, he would kill me and he would kill my family. So I did it.
Pledge of Silence, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
He was there when the war in Ukraine started.
Extreme history. Yeah, it's a big moment.
The extraordinary story behind Sean Penn's new Paramount Plus documentary, Superpower, when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
It can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Why did you miss the moment?
I'm not sure why they missed the moment.
It doesn't look like Congress is doing anything. That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. That means a civil conversation with perspective.
Welcome back to America Decides. House Speaker Mike Johnson isn't just facing opposition from Democrats over his $14.3 billion Israel aid package. Some members of his own party, like Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, are pushing for other foreign aid, like money for Ukraine, to be packaged with it.
Russia, Iran, and China do not share an ideology, but they do share interests. The threats facing America and our allies are serious, and they're intertwined. If we ignore that fact, we do so at our own peril.
CBS News Congressional correspondent Scott McFarland joins us now. Scott, Speaker Johnson doesn't really seem deterred and plans to move forward with a vote Thursday on this Israel package. Let's take a listen to what he told Fox News about his decision to move forward.
My intention is to call Leader Schumer over there and have a very direct and thoughtful conversation about this. I understand their priority is to bulk up the IRS, but I think if you put this to the American people and they weigh the two needs, I think they're going to say standing with Israel and protecting the innocent over there is in our national interest and is a more immediate need than IRS agents.
As you know, this will be one of the first major pieces of legislation that the Speaker will try to advance. Can he get it over the finish line?
This is quite something. There is an urgency, according to leadership, to get this thing on the road, to get moving on Israel aid. But based on what the Speaker has done, there's an urgency to take the longer, more scenic path, because there are a bunch of red alerts on the GPS here. First of all, separating the Israel aid and the Ukraine aid, as we've talked about before in the program. That's a wedge issue, not just here in Congress, but among Republicans themselves. Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, Mitt Romney, all saying you got to have these things all together, not just for the expediency of passage, but to send a bigger message on the world stage about U.S. priorities and stopping war. But then there's that issue of the IRS funding. You heard the Speaker reference it in that clip from Fox News. But the IRS funding, cutting the IRS to pay for Israel, is also one of those wedge issues, not just in Congress, but among some Republicans. I had one senior U.S. Senator, Republican, tell me, you can't cut the IRS and expect to save money. The IRS is the agency that generates the revenue from U.S. tax dollars, going after tax cheats, missing tax returns. If you cut the IRS, you've actually inflamed the deficit. So there you are, on a longer route on emergency aid.
The Speaker met with Secretary of State Antony Blinken. It seemed to be an impromptu meeting, but what more do we know about it? And any idea if the Secretary was able to convince Johnson to back the administration's broader funding request?
That really was the mission of the day for the Secretary of State, as he tried to convince or change minds here on Capitol Hill. Not just a meeting with the speaker, but right there, face to face with the senators who have to appropriate the money. And he has senators who are, to put it mildly, apprehensive about spending tens of billions of dollars, with concerns in Ukraine in particular that there may be money that is wasted or that could get into the wrong hands. So Secretary Blinken has a bit of an uphill fight convincing on the dollar amount in Ukraine, not to mention, Nicole, the overall combination of Ukraine aid and Israel aid.
Yeah, and as you referenced earlier, you know, there really does seem to be this emerging rift with Senate Republicans, not only over Speaker Johnson's plan to offset aid for Israel, but also with respect to this issue of Ukraine as well. What more are you hearing from lawmakers?
We talked to an awful lot of Senate Republicans, as you have this week, Nicole, and they're just in disagreement with each other. Take a listen to two of them, Mitt Romney and Josh Hawley, outside Senate hearings today.
If we're going to have a piece of legislation that actually becomes law, it's going to include support for Ukraine as well as Israel. There may be other elements that are attached to it, but it's not acceptable to abandon Ukraine. That would be devastating to our interests around the world.
Let's do this week. Let's get this done. Israel's facing it as an existential threat, and we can have a debate about Ukraine and the border and Taiwan, and those are all important topics too. We should discuss those, but I don't want to slow down Israel.
So, Nicole, there is this fundamentally compelling dynamic. It's emergency aid going through a notoriously sluggish process now on Capitol Hill of offsets and spending resolutions. This is going to cost, if nothing else, time.
And then just shifting gears briefly, while Secretaries Blinken and Austin were on the Hill today advocating for the president's foreign aid package, there was also another big hearing on the Hill with the Homeland Security Secretary, the FBI directors, and others. Let's take a listen.
Our most immediate concern is that violent extremists, individuals or small groups, will draw inspiration from the events in the Middle East to carry out attacks against Americans going about their daily lives. That includes not just homegrown violent extremists inspired by a foreign terrorist organization, but also domestic violent extremists targeting Jewish or Muslim communities.
So I just want you to expand a little bit there after listening to the FBI director. I mean, how concerned are officials right now about potential threats in light of what we're seeing in the Middle East right now?
Considering the stage and the audience, Nicole, quite a statement from the FBI director, saying in so many words that the threat is now on another level, that violent extremists can be galvanized by what's happening in the Middle East, targeting the U.S. homeland, and doing so in a way that is the most profound threat since the rise of ISIS years ago. He also mentioned a couple cases, the arrest of a Houston man, 20-year-old Jordanian living in Texas, suspected of studying bomb making and potentially targeting religious groups, and that there is an investigation into anti-Semitic threats at Cornell University in New York, not to mention one of the U.S. senators in the hearing rooms today who was threatened allegedly by a Nevada man, an anti-Semitic threat against Jackie Rosen of Nevada. There's just this growing sense that what's happening in the Middle East brings new and profound and noteworthy threats here at home.
All right, Scott McFarland, thank you so much. Several states have implemented near total abortion bans since the overturning of Roe versus Wade. We will take a look at a CBS News investigation on how some residents of Idaho are responding. You're streaming America Decides.
Why did you want to share your story?
Water up this high? Where are these coming from?
That's the million-dollar question. I'm a very curious person. I wake up every morning asking, what's happening in the world? Why is this happening? And how do we answer that question on the CBS Evening News?
An original documentary from CBS reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Nations are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We aim every night to be factual and fair. That's our goal.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony Dvoldar from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Since childhood, she never stopped reaching for the skies. Now she's spent more time in space than any other American.
I like being a part of something bigger than me.
Peggy Whitson's extraordinary career as a history-making astronaut when we go person to person.
Feel the forecast on the CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell.
I think I asked direct questions. I don't know that they're tough questions per se. Why aren't you holding yourself to that standard? It doesn't look like Congress is doing anything. What has to happen? That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. And that means a civil conversation with perspective.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. Since Roe versus Wade was overturned, 14 states have implemented near total abortion bans. Ohio currently has a 6-week abortion ban. However, the issue is on the state's November ballot. If approved next week, a referendum would amend Ohio's constitution to guarantee residents the right to make decisions about reproductive health care, including abortion. Early voting is underway there as Idaho experiences a mass exodus of doctors in response to its abortion policies. CBS News correspondent Adriana Diaz joins us here with more. And Adriana, you actually went to Idaho. You spoke with a mother who was personally affected by this new abortion law. We want to warn our viewers that it's pretty emotional and difficult to hear, but let's take a listen to that interview.
There was a really, really intense contraction and my water broke. We went to the bathroom and then ultimately I gave birth to the baby in the hotel bathroom. I had to stifle cries because, my child is on the other side of the wall.
In her pack and play.
In her pack and play. Sleeping. And my other child is sitting in the hotel bathroom.
Very difficult to listen to, and I'm sure difficult to do that interview. But in terms of her situation and others like her, is this becoming more common for mothers in Idaho? And how big a role is the legislature and this new law playing?
Nicole, this is definitely more common. There are other mothers like Becca. These are mothers who want to have children. These are wanted pregnancies. And in the case of Becca's, like others, they're non-viable pregnancies. So a stillbirth is expected. The child had many abnormalities to the brain, to the kidneys, to the heart, and wasn't expected to survive. Before Idaho's ban went into place, she would have had an abortion in Idaho, done by her high-risk OB. After this ban came into place, it was a trigger law, like in a lot of states. They basically passed laws that would be on the books if and when Roe was overturned. So when that happened, all those triggers basically were, took effect. And so those laws became the law of the land. But if, her preference would have been to have her abortion in Idaho by her doctor, that doctor is no longer in Idaho because most of the state's high-risk OBs have left the state. They say that this law, we spoke to them, Jessica Kagu, our producer on this, spoke to many of them directly, and Becca's high-risk OB said that this law basically degrades her ability to do her job. That was the word she used.
She had no choice.
She had no choice. She had to go to Portland to get this procedure. It went really poorly. She ended up in her hotel in the middle of labor. Her 2-year-old was with her because they didn't have childcare. And it was enormously traumatic and something that she and her doctor felt was really unnecessary.
You also talked to a Republican lawmaker in Idaho who seems to be evolving with respect to his position on this issue. Let's listen to that.
Did Idaho go too far with this abortion ban?
No, I think it's a good starting point.
What changes do you want to see to this legislation?
We have to have something in there that includes the health of the mother, not just the life of the mother, because health and life are two different things, in my opinion. And I must say, I'm pro-life, but I'm also pro-life for the mother, too.
So it sounds like he kind of wants to make some tweaks here to this legislation, but how much of this is an uphill battle?
I think it is an uphill battle because even though he is someone who is a Republican, he identifies himself as pro-life. He talked about that a lot in our interview. This has been tried before. Earlier this year, they tried to amend this ban to include abortions being allowed, being legal if they protect the health of the mother, not just the life of the mother. And that didn't make it into the legislation. So that's already been struck down. He wants to try again. And his hope is that if other lawmakers, his colleagues who, are staunchly no on this issue, hear more testimonies from women like Becca who are affected, he's hoping he can turn them around. But I have to say, Nicole, on this issue, people are dug in on both sides. It's so rare to see someone kind of ride the middle in that way, especially a lawmaker in this way. And he was very candid, and, he still felt that his beliefs were intact, but he felt that there needed to be some wiggle room, some flexibility to protect mothers, as well as, in his view, the unborn children. So, it was very unique and unusual to hear that perspective.
And then just very briefly, you talked a lot about how doctors are now leaving the state. How is that impacting healthcare there?
There's a maternal health crisis in Idaho. There's no other way to put it. Already, many doctors have left the state. They say they can't work there. And for a doctor to leave their patients is huge. Doctors get into this work because they care about their patients. So for them to feel so kind of hamstrung that it forces them to move their families, that says a lot. And lastly, I'll just tell you that already 2 labor and delivery units in the state of Idaho have closed down. And one of those hospitals specifically cited what they say is the criminalization of doctors' work.
Wow, Adriana Diaz with some very important reporting. We know you'll stay on it, and thank you so much. And that does it for today. You are streaming CBS News.
On Face the Nation, the way to learn is to listen.
We may have a recession.
Listening to how someone explains themselves is so key to understanding their perspective.